species over the long term. I'd also like to just make a note about restoration. The amount of acreage that was disturbed and is required to be restored through the HCP is approximately 80 to 100 acres of graded slopes. In comparison, there are 2,700 acres of grassland, coastal scrub, oak, woodland, riparian habitats that need to be managed and protected. Even these other habitats need to be managed for invasive species. The acreage required to be restored is less than 3% of the entire conservation area. Though there has been some successful restoration of mission blue habitat on graded slopes adjacent to Linda Vista, Southeast Ridge, and Northeast Ridge developments, with a limited budget, we have had to focus almost all of our efforts on protecting the existing conserved habitats, which is exactly what the HCP has done and needs to continue to do. We are in a situation now that because of coastal scrub succession, a natural process that occurs to grasslands and is happening all over coastal California, we need to expand the management to address both invasive species and coastal scrub succession. My final thought here is management will need to adapt to changing conditions observed in the field as new information arises through the monitoring programs, because conditions will change as a result of global warming, and protecting the metapopulations of the butterflies on San Bernardino Mountain is at stake here. The habitat managers need the funding and tools to do what is needed to protect the endangered species and the native habitats of San Bernardino Mountain over the long term. And I provide this picture of a scarce large blue, which I photographed in Poland a few years ago. And this is also a grassland endemic species that Maculinea teleus, and it has a closely related species, the large blue, which was extinct in Great Britain, but has been successfully reintroduced, and cattle grazing is an important tool to manage its habitat. When you take the cattle off, basically these grasslands change. They become weedy, they succeed to coastal scrub. And I have indicated that that may not happen in all the grasslands on San Bernardino Mountain, but a large majority of them, it is happening, and it will continue to happen unless we have the tools to manage it better. Thank you.
Okay. Council, have any questions to Patrick Kobernus?
Great job.
I do have some questions.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for putting together this report. Let's see. Okay, on page 2, it talks about the, on the bottom in your footnote, it says the set transit system will need to be supplemented with data provided through additional monitoring. It covers a wider geographical area to ensure that all habitat areas are covered on the mountain. However, at this time, the funding program of the HCP cannot support additional monitoring. So, based upon what you've said and just looking, reading through this document, the current funding that we have today is inadequate to supporting the habitat that's needed for the calliope and the other endangered butterflies of concern.
Are you asking about the monitoring or the management?
Well, yeah. Let's see. Well, okay. So the original monitoring that was done was the wandering type, yeah. And looking at this document, it was very critical of that type of monitoring. Now we have a new system in place. Right. But in order to really utilize that system, we need these additional funds in order to continue the work. Right. Basically, if we don't have the funding, the monitoring, it doesn't matter what type of monitoring we do, if we don't have the funds to control the invasive species that are encroaching on the habitat, on the grasslands. Yeah.
If you had to decide between monitoring and management, you'd have to say management is the higher priority, because if you can maintain the habitat there, at least you're protecting where the butterflies live. The monitoring was actually, because of budget constraints, it was changed to an every other year cycle. a few years ago to try to divert more money into habitat management. And habitat management is the highest priority. And monitoring is important, though. And I don't think we should be having to decide between the two, because they do go hand in hand. We wouldn't be able to draw these conclusions and publish a paper like this if it wasn't for all the monitoring data that we have. I would like to say that that you have a choice when you do monitoring. You can do either try to do abundance estimates, or you can do distribution studies. And really, those two systems go hand in hand, because when you're trying to get at relative abundance, you're covering specific areas, and you're trying to get an abundance of the population on the mountain. Well, that's going to give you a population estimate, but it's not going to tell you what's happening in other parts of the mountain. So the distribution study helps you determine what's happening mountain-wide and be able to keep track of all the habitat and make sure that we're not losing habitat areas. So that's why I've argued that the data actually was extremely useful in informing habitat management on the mountain and protecting their habitat, which is really the primary responsibility of the HCP, to protect these species and their habitat in perpetuity.
Okay. On page 3, it talks about the mission blue and the clippy butterflies having stable populations, but then it also talks about the decline of let's see. It says within the conservation area has declined as a result of coastal scrub secession. So we have stable populations, but we also have populations that are declining.
Yeah, let me explain that. So I did make a mistake in that where I said the word population, and I meant to say distribution. And there was a letter that came in about that. So I did mean to say distribution. What we did was, the distribution of the butterflies was stable, as far as we had the same number of areas that were increasing, significantly increasing, as we did that were significantly decreasing. So in other words, the distribution of the butterflies was stable. And we then focused in on where we were seeing the declining trends. And so we're not so concerned about where the butterflies are increasing. That's a good thing. We focused on where they were decreasing and tried to highlight that as an issue and make sure those areas are addressed.
Okay. Also on page 3 in the third paragraph, you say that 122 acres of grassland has been lost to coastal scrub, but this was back in 2004, right. So extrapolating to 2010, you're putting that amount of acres lost to 150.
Right.
The next paragraph talks about not eradicating the coastal scrub, but thinning it out. And from your presentation, it sounded like if the money was there to do the management of thinning the coastal scrub, that we could bring back grassland habitat.
Yeah, and it really is a combination of tools. In every area of the mountain is somewhat different as far as what the invasive species threats are and what the rate of coastal scrub succession is. And so within each area, you need to apply sort of your tool bag that you have available to you differently. So, but at this point, we've had a very limited tool bag to use, and partly is because we don't have the ability to use grazing animals. And honestly, goats and sheep are not very good at managing grasslands. They might be good for initially removing the coastal scrub, but the cattle, which focus on grasses, weedy grasses, it's really quite dramatic what they can do as far as opening spaces for the native wildflowers and grasses to come in. And this has been documented by a lot of researchers, not only in the Bay Area, but internationally too.
I thought the issue was with the coastal scrub. So the cows eat grass, but the goats are the grazers. So they are the not grazers, but they would eat the bush.
Right.